live. There's the little recording in progress note. Look, as everyone's joining today, I just wanted to say hello to everybody. It's really nice to see you all, the three of you on the panel and everyone else joining for what is the seventh session for the Hayylo Insights webinar. Today, I'm very lucky to be joined by some amazing minds across community services. Janet Wagland, who is a long-time friend and colleague that we've known at Hayylo for many, many years, since the early days. Janet, you're General Manager of Community at Brightwater Group in WA. Fantastic to have you on board today. Nicole Standfield, General Manager at General Home Care and SIA Community Care, one of our new clients here at Hayylo. So thank you so much for joining us as well today. And then Meg Braithwaite, Hayylo, of course, will be here talking all things tech for us today, and who's our Head of Growth and Strategic Accounts, and has been in the sector, working and implementing technology across the sector for, I believe it's over 15 years now. So, thank you everybody for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Guys, we're going to get straight into this. I've been very much looking forward to this conversation for a little while now. And I think, as we're talking about, just as we led into the conversation today, and as you were talking about a little bit, Meg, as you've gone around the provider community and reached out to a few people to get a bit of a pulse check on how everyone's doing under the increasing pressures that the sector seems to be under at the moment. And it's things I think we're all pretty aware of as a group. You know, we know that we were heading into or just out of a Royal Commission, which was bringing, another round of reform, which seems to be a constant thing across the sector that we're constantly dealing with, especially for the providers. That's bringing in, really extra reporting requirements. We're really seeing, I guess, an escalating staffing shortage that's happening across the sector as well as the ongoing funding changes that are occurring. And now we've just added a small little scenario of a pandemic on top of that, which is kind of pushing or escalating all of those issues across the sector. And it's an extremely challenging time for health in general and especially community services out there. So, with that in mind, and with the concept of sustainability is kind of what we're talking about today. How are we going? How are we going to get through this? And is there kind of a silver lining on the other side of what we're experiencing at the moment? So let's get into it. And I think I might start today, talking about, I guess, the lay of the land, where we're currently sitting with everything. We're saying that, there's a lot of changes and pressure, as we've kind of outlined today. And really, even from my experience, speaking to a lot of our clients, just the stress and strain that they're under on a day-to-day level. Janet, I might kind of start with you over there in WA. How are things over there? How are you looking at the world? What are the challenges that you're dealing with as an organisation at the moment?
I think my part of the organisation, which is largely focused on our disability services, the main challenges are around how the NDIS itself operates. It's the unpredictability of the current government approach, the rhetoric that is spun around, providers and what they're doing and what they're not doing, and what's going to be funded and what's not going to be funded. And the uncertainty about the changes that government is talking about bringing. So being able to plan and consider what your services should look like, you feel like you do that and you make changes, and then something else is about to change in their approach. So you're in this constantly changing world. And I know that WA has had the advantage of being behind the times with everybody else. So we get to phone a friend, which we often do, and have a discussion about, what's it like in Victoria, or what's it like in New South Wales. But, we're soon starting to lose that advantage. We're pretty much in the mix now and experiencing that uncertainty. But it's not only the uncertainty about the overall funding model, which, you know, that's pretty much what the NDIS is, but it's also the inconsistency that we're seeing in their approach to individuals. So the inconsistency of plans, you know, we end up with some people that are funded for something and others who aren't funded for it. Whether that's due to people's ability to advocate for themselves or whether that's due to the individual planners and their level of knowledge. You're never really certain as to what that is. And then, you know, where we're trying to provide services to people who have complex and changing needs, it's also the lack of responsiveness for that client population. So there's many challenges, I guess, related to the NDIS in its overall unpredictability, but then it's the uncertainty that comes around every planning scenario with each client. So to be able to run a business where you're forecasting and you're looking ahead, it makes it very, very difficult.
And before Nicole, I throw to you to give a little bit of the East Coast and kind of an insight into the home care. Janet, has it, you know, is it getting better? Has it always been this way? You've been in the sector for quite a few years. Is it just, you know, we hear a lot the kind of conversation around this is just the way it's always been. Is it getting better? Has it always been kind of under that pressure? And obviously, you know, with the way things have happened over the last 18 months, that's got to be shifting in a sense. But, you know, is this always been the case?
I don't think so much in WA and the disability sector. And people talk about WA having a great system before. Well, we did, but for some groups of people, it wasn't great for everybody. And I think there's a lot of impression that, you know, it was a system that worked well, everybody got funded. Well, that's not the case. In fact, it was a bit of a lottery like most states had for their systems. And I think it was born out of the old days of people with intellectual disability authority for the intellectually handicapped. So my services are for people with acquired brain injury and Huntington's disease and other neurological disabilities. So they only came in latter days, I guess, the last 20 years into this scheme. So basically, they've always been playing a bit of catch up in funding. So for us, the promise of the NDIS was one of certainty, that everybody would have access to funding. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is actually more uncertainty and more inconsistency. And that's really disappointing.
Yeah, really, really interesting. Look, we'll keep kind of digging into this as a collective, but and Nicole, just to kind of get us started, what's the last 18 months been like for you guys over here in the East, and what are the kind of core challenges that you're focusing on at the moment?
Thanks, Simon. I think a couple of the areas that, particularly for us, it has been fatigue, and fatigue at an umbrella level. I was reading an article the other day that talked about the Corona coaster. So I can't claim that title myself, but it's a really good analogy for what it's been like, I think, in Victoria. And I think everyone, you know, we kind of, you know, went through the roller coaster last year of coronavirus, and then we kind of got to January this year and we thought, oh, great, you know, we're behind all of that. So that roller coaster of ups and downs has been ongoing, and I think that has been quite fatiguing because there's been so much change that's happened with that. So just when we think we've got it, it's like, oh, all of a sudden now you've got vaccinations thrown into the mix of how you manage this, and then there's the IPA home care funding changes. Just throw that into the mix. So there's some change fatigue in the continuous. Oh, we've got to, okay, so this week we're focusing on this new thing, and then this week we're focusing on that new thing. So the ability to actually just pause and go, okay, we've actually done a lot, and let's just take stock of what we've done and enjoy that for a moment before we go to the next new thing. We actually haven't had a chance to do that. So there's been the constant new things. And look, some of them have been good and some of them have not been so good. So, you know, in terms of trying to keep the silver linings there, but the ongoing change fatigue I think has been seen quite significantly, and particularly on the East Coast and more so in Victoria. We only operate in Victoria, so I sort of can't really talk for some of my northern cousins. But you know, I guess the other aspect has been the ability to access services. So a lot of people have gone, oh, look, can't do that because of the virus, because of COVID. It's like, well, actually, we can't actually just stop everything because of COVID. So there's been an element, and particularly mental health services, and I know I don't necessarily want to go off on tangents, but that has been incredibly difficult to access the mental health services that have increasingly been needed in a system that was already stretched beforehand, let's be honest, but a system that's now even more stretched with the concept of, well, you know, we can't do that because of COVID. So some of that, I guess, so probably the change fatigue and then the accessibility has probably been the two biggest things that have been problematic.
Yeah, look, that's some really good points there, and definitely some stuff I want to dig into. The psychology services and mental health services are definitely the thing that I'm hearing, even on a personal level, with psychologists that are friends of mine who are booked out at the moment and literally just can't fit people in. The call times and waiting times and things for Beyond Blue and the dropped out calls and those kind of things, but probably a whole webinar that we could do on that one subject at a different time. There was some other points there around the fatigue that I think is really interesting, and the opportunity to stop and reflect on the positives that have actually happened through this very intense, challenging time. And we've spoke about it on other webinars about how that challenge does bring the innovation and the silver lining. But it's what is the quote that it's hard to see the forest for the trees, you know, sometimes. And so before we get into those kind of points, I'd love to kind of dig into those things a little bit more. I might throw to you, Meg. You have a great cross section of the sector and speak to a lot of different people out there. What are you seeing up there in we joke a little bit, the bubble that is Queensland, up in the northern states, but and maybe even just to comment on what Janet and Nicole have spoken about.
Yeah, sure. Look, it's yes, we are in a very lucky bubble up here in Queensland. So definitely, you know, not at the scale that our New South Wales and Victorian counterparts have been going through, but in the I do talk to them quite regularly, but in the lead up to this webinar, I specifically reached out actually just to get that pulse check around our key points. And really, it's obviously not going to be very surprising, but the key words were immensely challenging and actually just really stressed. They're quite stressed out, and that's even in the relatively calmer waters up here in Queensland, the providers that I spoke to up here as well. So I think what happens at this point in time is that we forget at a collective level how much all of these changes, and I think again at a government level, it's unknown to them, I think at this decision-making side, what the ripple effect of their seemingly knee-jerk decisions are that then sweeps across the providers, you know, when they make these types of decisions. And we get some leeway in terms of time, push outs and so forth, but there's actually very, very little support and indeed understanding around what actually has to happen at an operational level at scale when they make these types of decisions. And oftentimes the constant change is that the change is sitting and compounding on stuff that happened years prior as well. So there's just this continual domino effect around what happens. And then we get to this point where we're in this mass discontent at an industry where it impacts workforce and their perception of the work that we do and their well-being. And it all has this web of interconnectivity really at the end of the day. And I just don't think actually at a higher executive level that understanding around what they actually incur is truly understood. So the amount of change that happens at a system level, operationally, the change management that needs to happen across staff that are logistically very hard to reach, even on the best of times. They often don't come into the office at all. The impact is quite pronounced. And so when I do speak to them, yes, in bullet point form, they've told me, it's challenging, immensely stressful, not coping, drowning. And those are said, of course, in a banter to a friend, but at the end of the day, they're all incredibly busy and trying to keep heads above water. So it's startling, really.
Yeah, look, and look, Meg, I think everyone in Victoria, especially, and probably across the country, can agree that widespread decision making on core health issues has an impact on companies and communities out there, and the implementation of those strategies are usually very different to the realities of the intent behind them. And there's an interesting question that's come through that I'll field in a moment. Richard, thank you for joining us again. And, you spoke about one of the downstream effects there, Meg, around, staffing shortages and that kind of impact that was already something escalating, across the sector as well. And so kind of before we, I think, move out of the, move into some more of the kind of techniques and things, maybe I'll throw that out to the group. Janet, how are you guys, I know we spoke about it briefly the other day, but how are you guys seeing the world now around staffing and the shortages of staffing, across your disability services and beyond? And what are you guys doing to try and alleviate some of that pressure?
So basically, we've got two lots of staffing. So we have our professional staff who provide allied health support coordination, behaviour support practitioner, and nursing services. And many of those positions are at critical shortage at this point in time. So when you're running a business, you're impacted on how much business you can provide by whether you actually have those staff around. And we're doing some work with the universities to look at opportunities to bring students on board. So I guess we're trying to future-proof, and we always have had a good student group coming through our services, but we're trying to build on that some more and look at how we can creatively bring younger and newer students, like the year ones and the year twos, in, so that they're even just learning how to relate to people in the community. Because in the community-based services, which many of those are now, rather than being residentially based, you find that the new grads are fearful of actually being able to come out in an unsupervised type of position. So how do you provide them with a supervisory structure with where your funding is, but also how do you get them comfortable with having to work alone out there in the community? And we're hoping we can start, right from year one, but that doesn't of training, but that doesn't cure the problem now. From a support worker point of view, WA has seen challenges before because of the mining industry. Every time we have a mining boom, suddenly we have no staff because, they earn a whole lot more cleaning toilets up north than what they do providing care work down here. That's just really been compounded by the fact that we've got no access to overseas workers. So we're not building on through having no immigration. We're not building on the population that we have available to us. So really, it's a huge challenge in trying to look at, well, how do we be an attractive provider to bring people to us in a very small market? But it also means that you have a workforce that have control over whether they work or whether they don't work and where they work. So we're now seeing things like staff members who are working across more than one provider, in fact, multiple providers, and then they pick and choose what shifts they want to work according to, their lifestyle, whether they like the client on that particular day, whether they like the other people that they're going to be working with on that particular shift. So really, the workforce is now in control of what they're going to work, and they don't always have sympathy for the fact that you've got a shortage on the ground, and that you're trying to fill a night shift with only one person and you don't have anyone to fill that. So yeah, crisis point at sometimes, I think.
And you make some great points in there. And what something that came up for me was, and add that to the changing dynamics of, the new generation of workers, the younger generations. They want more inspiration. They want more flexibility. They want more work-life balance. That was already occurring in the background as well. So I could only imagine that's applying a lot of extra pressure. There's so much in that as well that we'll dig in to come back to kind of staffing and new staffing models shortly. But Nicole, what about yourself? How are you thinking about this escalating staffing pressure that we're under?
Sure. I mean, adding on to what Janet was saying in terms of the lack of migrant workforce coming through, The other thing that has been impacted in Victoria is the fact that there is a whole bunch of people who commenced their, say personal care training courses and so forth last year, who were not able to finish their placement hours because they weren't able, because of COVID, they weren't able to actually undertake those placement hours in settings. So there's an entire cohort of students who haven't actually graduated from those TAFE courses and through the RTOs. So that's an added pressure that we're seeing here, I guess. But on top of some of the other aspects you mentioned, I guess one of the things we're finding is about meeting people where they're at, and it's not actually just about money. So look, sure, we are not a well-paid sector. If you want to make a whole bunch of cash, do not come and become a care worker, because that is not going to create you a giant nest egg. But it's about tapping into people's motivation. So some of the things we're doing is that really crucial engagement piece, like what is actually getting you out of bed to come and work for us? So, and why are you choosing us versus the other crowd down the road? So, one of the things that we did recently was we actually did just a small mail out of some chocolates and so forth to each one of our staff. Now it sounds really, really minimal, but we actually had a 60% feedback rate from our staff just by doing that. And it was like, it blew my mind. I really, you send out surveys and all that, you might get, 20% respond, but 60% feedback rate about, thank you, I just needed that. I needed that acknowledgement that I'm doing okay. So, and particularly as Meg said before, remote workforce, people are quite isolated. You're sending them their details on the phone, and here are your shifts for the week, and go for it and have fun and whatever. But so to do that and get that feedback was, like I said, was phenomenal, and it just showed the power of that humanistic connection, which essentially we are human services. So we really have to, in terms of our philosophy, really look at, okay, we are asked staff to be humanistic with the clients, so therefore we have to be humanistic with the staff. So just making sure that we're aligned on that.
Yeah, I love that. And it plays out to, again, the next new generational concepts that we're talking about before. But I think also, like even as we're speaking about the mental health services briefly, how much this pandemic, in a sense, has, opened up an understanding of the importance of human connection and of mental health, and how that has downstream effects on on physical health, like we've spoken about on a few of the webinars before, but also economics and health systems in general. And I think it's a real macro shift that's kind of occurring, hopefully in a positive sense. But we'll get to the silver lining stuff a little bit later. Meg, I'm going to throw to you for some thoughts as well. But then I would like to go back and answer Richard's question here, and then kind of pose another one after that. But I'll any kind of thoughts or reflections on what both Janet and Nicole have brought up there?
No, and I'm only to add that that's really mirroring what I'm hearing as well. And in terms of being able to foster that deeper connection or allies really with your staff, really, it's not an adversarial relationship. It's we're all friends here, and really driving in that, meeting needs is going to help both them and the provider in the long run. So you kind of have to take it hand in hand, and it engenders a different response. So what's been so great to see at that silver lining level is that what I would call proactive investment, rather than, it'd be very easy for, providers at this point in time, especially with all the funding changes, to revert directly into cost cutting mode. We really needing to trim balance sheets and so forth, and being very mindful across that. What I actually have seen is, it's always through the Hayylo lens, of course, but I have seen a real investment in, rather than a cost cutting, laying foundations to build on that are going to set the scene, if you will, set the foundations for how they want to employ staff and engage staff, and what is meaningful. So finding out what is meaningful, finding out why they are working for us, and what do they need at a truly at an operational level to make their lives easier. And therefore, it's happy staff, happy clients. And this is it's a hand-in-hand approach. The two are very intimately connected. So That's been really great to see on the ground side, just in terms of what I've been witnessing. And there's a whole range of other things that come with that. It's not just tech. There are a whole range, as Janet was saying, alignment with universities and instilling that practitioner style respect for the roles that are engaged in the professions that are so sorely needed. Whilst it might be hard yards right now, is so wonderful to hear that that is happening, because it is exactly what is required in terms of associating that higher practitioner role that they do have when they're operating in an unsupervised state. And I think that will indeed actually lure people in the end to the industry rather than curtail it. So those buddy systems, that flexibility, the mentoring process, the giving where you can, Nicole, to your staff, those are all very much things I'm seeing, and to be applauded, really. Changes that I wouldn't have seen that, I wouldn't have heard that feedback, all those steps 5 years ago. Really, I wouldn't have. So in my experience anyway, so that's been a really lovely thing to witness.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, Meg. Thank you. And I think it is something that, we see, evolving and changing, across society in general, but also, across the sector. And so I'd like to dig in a little bit around this, and I will, Richard, get to your question in a second. The question is just for the panel as well, but I have another question first. But the question is essentially, taking a step back, and, and hindsight is always a beautiful thing. But the question is really around, do you think if the sector, moved a little bit quicker to adopt technologies like telehealth or, AI chatbots and all of these innovations that we could call them, and I've probably got some opinions on that I'll keep to myself today. But would have that on one step made a difference? Could have we moved? I know it's a bit of a loaded question in a sense. You can always do things better in hindsight, but maybe would have that change things, or maybe is that changing things? To maybe reframe that question, are we viewing things a little bit differently now around technology and the implementation of technology across community services? Maybe Janet, start with yourself.
I'm a lover of technology. I think if I look at technology as from my occupational therapy hat, to me, in the beginning, it was about assistive technology to enable people to live more independently. And so we've always had technology in our corner, but I feel sometimes we are slow as a sector to adopt it. But I also saw at the beginning of the NDIS a lot of organisations rushing to change the systems technology that they had. And I think many providers actually found that was the wrong thing. They spent many millions of dollars buying something that didn't actually deliver to them what they thought it was going to deliver, and was no better than what they had. And I think while we continue to have this unpredictability as to how it's going to work, and some, waiting for government itself to embed some of its technology, it makes it really difficult to be going out as an organisation, especially a bigger organisation, and spending lots of money on something that may not work for you. But I think there's a lot more that we need to consider as far as the direct service provision and how we can better utilise technology at that point. And I think what I'd like to do some work on, and we've started to have some discussions on it in my organisation, is basically, so how does technology support better outcomes for our staff and for our clients on the ground? And how does that actually work together? So what are the staffing models and the staffing levels that we actually need to run a safe service? Is there any part of that can be delivered on through technology? Is there any efficiencies that can free up the staff to have more time with the clients? And are there things with technology that can actually support the clients to be doing more for themselves? So I think we've still got to do a lot more work about that. And I think that it's not only bringing the sector along, it's bringing families and clients along as well, because sometimes their fear of actually having something that's delivered by some technical device, as opposed to having the person on the ground. We've still got people who are not well, many people who are not ready for that change in how they see care to be delivered.
Yeah, that's a really, really great point, Janet. And we see that internal staff with providers have that same apprehension and reservation, and we see that out into the community as well at times. And it's, you know, we joke, which is really not a joke, but that it's, you know, it's an art form, you know, to be able to get the technology to work and scale across community services, especially. And because, as Meg was touching on before, change management is extremely hard. I have a question about government support next, but Nicole, where's just to answer that question before we move on, and then maybe elevate this conversation into a solution mode a little bit. But you know, where's your thoughts around, you know, the applications of technology to solve this problem or these problems that we're facing today?
Absolutely. I think first of all, I think the progress in particularly sort of the telehealth type of area that we've seen as a result of COVID has been immense. So if I remember to conferences I was at 2 years ago, it was like, oh, well, this is kind of coming. And at the time I was supporting some rural health services, and it was, the rural areas really needed it. But the adaptation and the adoption of it from the city services to come to rural was really, people were quite tech phobic. So I think people had to get over their phobia and really embrace tech over the last 18 months, which I think has been fabulous. In terms of sort of systems and tech adoption in an organisation, one thing that I know we as an organisation have been doing recently is very much looking at our processes and what do we want to achieve, a little bit like what Janet was saying, what do we want to achieve for our clients and our staff, and then finding a system that fits into that, not the other way around, not going, oh, look at this U-Butte system, let's grab it, and then making our processes to fit that. So it's about what do we want to achieve and finding the system that fits into that. And it's been a really interesting journey. I know me personally, over my journey, I've probably been guilty of being the one who, you know, the fancy lights and let's buy the system, and then getting it in and going, oh, whoopsie. So definitely the benefit of hindsight for me at a leadership level has been, no. Let's, what do we want to achieve, and then find the system to fit that. So I think that's a really crucial step in the process.
Oh, I love that. I'm only laughing because, you know, shiny things are attractive. They really are. We anchor back on that concept a lot around, well, especially I think at the moment, a lot of people have a lot of opinions on a lot of different things out there in the world at the moment. And a phrase that I keep going back to is, you know, less opinions, better questions. And it is that process, like you were talking about, Janet and Nicole, around asking the questions of what is it that we're trying to achieve, and then building from the ground up. Yeah, and Richard was saying great wisdom there, shared there, Nicole. But I've got another question. And Meg, I'll get to you. I know you'll talk tech all day with me, so we'll get back to that point in a second. But before we move into a little with the kind of end of today, I've got some kind of, I guess, just, you know, looking at that silver lining, some moving forward questions. But I did want to anchor on something. There's something I've been thinking about as we led up to this. Excuse me. There seems to be an increasing pressure, you know, mainly due to the pandemic, that was already on a sector that, from, you know, my limited time in community services over the last, I think it's seven or so years now, that was already under pressure, that was really, you know, struggling with change and the upcoming reforms and the funding that we've spoken about today and the staffing that we've spoken about today. And now we've got this, with this pandemic, and we were speaking a little bit earlier around, you know, every story on the news is about our amazing frontline teams, and we should all be thanking our frontline teams, and which I completely agree with. So what is the government doing to support you both at the moment throughout this? Has there been extra funding, extra support, extra packages? Meg, you were kind of touching a little bit on this earlier around, you know, blanket what would you call it, blanket legislation or blanket policies put out there. Are you, you know, on the front line, are you receiving extra support because of the extra pressures that you're under, or is it just BAU out there? Maybe Janet to start, because that's my order today.
I think it's a bit BAU. Yeah, you're really, I think in the disability sector, you'll have seen things in the media and all about how we sort of the forgotten group over here. And we see that where there's such a strong focus through our health department and through the Commonwealth Health Department on aged care and implementing things like vaccination, flu vax first, and now COVID vax, and directions as to who's allowed in and out of facilities and all of those sorts of things. So for a business like ours, it's large, it's got multiple different service sectors. You have all of these directions coming in around aged care, and then disabilities like, well, how is it going to be for us? And when we're rolling it out in this organisation, we have to have consistency, because we can't have half the organisation doing one thing and the other half doing something else. But when we're reliant on government, for instance, like the COVID vaccinations for our clients and for our staff, we had to very much chase the providers to come and start running clinics in our services to provide vaccines. And now we can see the writing on the wall, where we're going to have mandatory vaccination for our staff members, and we're receiving, letters from the NDIS Commission saying you guys are responsible for making sure all of your clients are vaccinated, and what have you been doing about it? And all we're thinking is we've spent months fighting for somebody to come in to run a clinic to actually provide these services, and now it's our responsibility. So there's a lot of responsibility and accountability on the providers, but not a lot of support unless you go chasing it, and the chasing is pretty hard fought for.
Yeah, that's great, Janet. We're going to pick it up. We're going to get positive after this, but I did want to kind of use that as an anchor point for the conversation, because there seems to just be such a disconnect from a lot of the time the narratives out there around what's happening and the realities of how that's been implemented out into the world. So that's really interesting insight. So Nicole, for yourself as well, how are you seeing that play out?
So we're similar to Janet in that we have NDIS as well as home care, but I guess what we've been seeing is particularly our cousins in the residential aged care space have a whole bunch of regulation coming into them. But because aged care, home care kind of fits into that as well, there's a bunch of regulations that's coming in there, but it doesn't quite fit exactly. So we've had to sort of navigate through this sentence and that sentence in the regulations to go, well, how do we fit that for community aged care? So that's been one aspect. But I guess if we're jumping into silver linings a little bit, sort of, Simon, you were saying before, the angels on the front line. And I think one of the things that we've been really trying to do is connecting with community. So connecting with our local community areas, and particularly our local schools and so forth, to make care work an actual desirable outcome or desirable career for people, coming out through the school system, for example. So that's been some of the work that we've been doing from that staff shortage. And I've probably gone off topic here a little, Simon, apologies. But yeah, just I think, definitely jumping onto those silver linings of going, care workers are our angels on the front line. And so whilst that terminology is in community, let's jump on that. Let's really use that to make care work and to make, our sector attractive and desirable for the next generation coming through.
Yeah, love it. I love it. And I guess that was my loaded question there a little bit as well, to shift and pivot this into, I'll throw to you, Meg, to kind of elevate this conversation up a little bit. But, these overarching, policies, these overarching things that kind of get put on the sector, put on the community at the moment at large. I think everyone's feeling that. The sector's been feeling that forever, as Janet, you were talking about before. In a sense, it's always kind of been this way. But I think the whole community is feeling that same thing, and there's a new regard for community services and frontline health services in general. And I think that is the answer in a lot of respects. And I'm definitely not qualified, and this is just an opinion, but it is, that bottom-up community, is how we solve a lot of these things. It's about, the compassion and kindness for the neighbour and the person next to you and in the community that will help us kind of change and shift the dial on these things. But without getting too philosophical, Meg, I'll throw to you, which I'm known to do at times, but I'll throw to you, Meg. So just I've got one other kind of ending question on this, but I am interested on a, maybe on a technological sense or within your view, having to think about all of these different things that the panel have spoken about today. You touched on it before around, happy staff, happy customers, maybe with the technology hat on there for a moment. What are some of the ways, what are some of the silver linings that we're seeing? Nicole was speaking briefly before about, the road to some really good, positive innovation, not innovation theatre, which we've been known for a little bit in the sector with potentially chatbots and things like that, that Richard was calling out before. But what are the wins that have kind of happened, and how do providers, in your sense, start to focus on some solutions out of this really challenging time?
Yeah, it's a good question, Si. It's complicated, I guess, but at the end of the day, it all links back to actually what Nicole and Janet were saying that they're doing, which is so great to hear, and that's having clarity over grassroots use cases, real operational scenarios that they're trying to mend and make better, and addressing that at a grassroots level, because that then feeds up and has a domino effect across both the worker experience and both the client experience. So I think from a Hayylo hat perspective, of course, we're seeing that through enabling better communication. So we drive that through being able to have them connect at both a health team level easily, so that they can see the information that they need to see, and be able to communicate that both with the client and their teams. So in whatever shape or form that takes, though, it doesn't have to be specifically around a Hayylo use case, but what I think this has done from a silver lining has really exposed that need. We've really needed to engage workforce and keep them informed and aware, have transparency over what the guidelines and the changes are meaning and the ripple effect to their jobs, what that then means for the clients. And, at scale, that's really hard to do across thousands of clients and across thousands of workers. So having that clarity at an operational level around what's happening on a day-to-day, I think has been one of the nuggets that's really shifted in the frame, because prior to that, it was actually all the cost saving and the actual mechanics of the scheduling of services, and it had a different frame of reference to it. Whereas whilst that is still, of course, important, it's kind of also just an assumed thing. It's going to always be there. And it's that what makes a change or the impact is actually how the staff are enabled and the majority of the staff, which is the workforce on the ground, how they're actually enabling a better experience for those teams. And what does that actually mean for them? What does that mean in terms of what do they need to do their jobs better day to day? And you really have to work up from that. So at a tech level, that's been incredibly interesting to watch. And I myself, who are a long bit of a cynic, I guess, over the years of doing this for so long, I've been incredibly surprised around how much it's welcomed and how much it's actually absorbed. So there's a bit of fear around the change as well, which is pretty natural for this sector. Fear because the logistics at scale, it's hard to do. Anxiety over how it will be received, used consistently. All of those things are, play an important role. But I think whatever you're actually talking about, whatever system you're actually talking about, I'm talking about it from a Hayylo perspective, of course, but whatever form that takes for you, I think that grassroots awareness around what they need to do their job well, and how Janet was saying, how you can be doing more with less because you have less, is incredibly important for operations day to day now.
Great. And Janet, agree, disagree? Thoughts before my final question to the panel?
I was just thinking as Meg was talking about how much change. So there's really the changes that are happening and the changes that have been forced by the pandemic, how much positive change has happened out of all of that. The fact that, I think I said when we were preparing for this, that all the stuff our IT department was always going to do around connectivity with staff and staff, office of anywhere for staffing, all of those sorts of things, but that was always going to take a long time, suddenly miraculously happened in hardly any time at all.
Yeah.
But I think also our ways of working changed, you know, whether that was about our therapists learning to work in a more transdisciplinary way and trusting each other to be able to do parts of assessments for each other and sharing information rather than having to go from site to site, or whether it was, you know, something that we did with our colleagues at Curtin University, where we hooked their third year students up with our clients during the first lockdown here. That we're living in our SIL houses, so that those students learnt to communicate with the clients online, but also did some work with them about how to keep yourself occupied during a lockdown. You know, so a totally different way of operating that was great for the students, but was really great for our clients. So I think, you know, there's been some challenges, but there's also been some huge positives, and I was thinking about them very strongly as Meg was talking.
Yeah, that's great. It just something, I don't know why it came up, but it you know, the sector did feel like, and excuse the pun, you know, needed a bit of a shot in the arm, and in a sense, you know, we've definitely got that over the last 18 months. And so Nicole, last thoughts on this one before a bit of a different question to finish off the day.
Thanks, Simon. And following on from Meg and Janet, I think, you know, one of the things that we've been doing is a little bit of just trial and error. Let's just give it a shot, see what happens. And I think there's been a lot more willingness to do that. You know, in a sector that is, let's be honest, we're really quite risk averse. And look, we need to be, because we are looking after very vulnerable people. But there has been more of a, I guess, an appetite to go, let's give it a shot. Let's see what happens. And I think in that we've done quite a few different pilots over the journey of the last 18 months. You know, we've grabbed a few of our grassroots staff and said, hey, we came up with this harebrained idea. What do you think? Like, will this actually work for you? And they're like, yeah, all right. Or actually, no, that is a harebrained idea. We're not doing that. So really engaging our grassroots staff with some of these ideas that we might have to just try something different. And I think that has been both engaged in the workforce, but it's been some great silver linings. And then they've also then felt empowered to come and say, actually, I was with a client the other day and I thought, what about this? So opening that up to be a much more collaborative sort of way of operating, rather than that, well, the execs say we need to do it this way. So it's been very, very fluid in that communication, which has been really lovely, as much as it's been difficult because you don't have people in the office. But I think because we've been forced to use tech, people are like, well, I'm just going to shoot an email through and see what happens. So it's been a really lovely journey to see that evolve as well.
Yep, awesome. I love that insight, and it is so interesting to try to dig into those positives in these challenging times. You know, I do throw to quotes and things a lot, but yeah, it is, the pressure, it does create diamonds at times. And I think it really is an amazing time. It is a time of great change in community services and across the world in a lot of respects. And so one other thing that I wanted to finish off today, and I just want to thank you all for your amazing insights. It's a fantastic conversation. And there's something else that I've been tracking that I'd like to get your opinions on, as we talk about kind of, the pressure that the sector's under, seemingly a little bit of the lack of foresight or support that we're receiving from government, the changing landscape across funding, and health service delivery in general. We're seeing the rise of, I'll just put it in a blanket term, but, the Uberization of care in a sense. There's a lot of funding coming into the sector for new models, new types of peer-to-peer support, that they're lean and mean and very funded and nearly very much aligned to the government mandates or the government's communications around the funding changes that the sector's kind of going through. As to what I see as leading providers in the sector, Nicole, your group being a very, I would call a young, very innovative, fast-moving provider, and Janet, yourselves being one of the leaders in WA and a very established provider over the years. How are you guys looking at this concept that's seemingly coming up in the background? And I'll just keep the flow today going. Janet, we'll start with yourself.
I guess, I've always had a view that there's space in the industry for everybody. And really, I think where we're now delivering, where we're working in a world where it's much more client driven, client having much more control over what they want, who they want to deliver their services. I think that more Uber-based model where people can actually book who they want, when they want, I think for many clients works very well, but they still have to be clear about what it is that they want. And the providers still have to be able to meet that expectation. So those things don't change regardless of how you're actually delivering your services. So really it comes down to each individual person, what suits their needs, what backup support they've got from their families and other informal supports, and how well that provider delivers upon that promise. So those things will never change regardless.
Yeah, that's really great insight. Thank you so much. And Nicole, yourself? Thanks.
Look, I think, without wanting to use, catch cries and so forth, disruptors can be really good in sectors. And I think it does create the need for established providers to keep up with the times, so to speak. So I think that's one good thing. You can get kind of stuck in just this is what we do, and not necessarily look at that innovation. So I think that's a good thing, that other companies come in and you go, oh, okay, we might have to pivot a little bit on how we do things. But I think that consumer choice, I think, is crucial. And like what Janet was saying, I think what is still a bit of a mystery in this sector is that consumers come in, and especially if they're new to the sector, they actually don't know what choice they have. If I've only ever lived in a main street and I've seen, Coles and Woolworths, well, I don't know that IGA is down the road. So I think it's really important that that as a provider, when a consumer first calls you and says, help, I need services, but I don't even know what I need, is to go, okay, here are the choices, here is what's available in the market for you, and be really open and transparent with clients and with consumers when they're doing that first point of call, because then that's when they're going to have really, really large empowerment in their choice of services. And I think, therefore, making yourself, if from a provider's point of view, if you make yourself the best choice for people, then they will choose you anyway. So I think that's, regardless of what else is in the market.
Yeah, I love that. It comes down to the service, comes down to the insights. Meg, final thoughts before we wrap it up?
I think those ladies handled that question very well, really. There's probably nothing much I can really add to that, other than at a nursing side, I've always felt compelled to maintain, I'm okay for all choice at all of always, but there really does need to be that maintenance of quality and accountability. So as long as that is still there, and ultimately that's not going to get dissolved they still have to have that robustness and quality around what they're actually delivering on, and an accountability, just as we have right now through established providers in a non-Uberized state for the most of it, part of it. So that would be my only cause for concern there. But really, as Nicole and Janet were saying, that's just a part of the advisory services and making consumers aware around what is available, how they access those services, and what the benefits and pros and cons are, accordingly. So it's a whole new world, though, that's coming through. And as Nicole said, disruption is really always a good thing, really, at the end of the day. It allows us to be very nimble and agile in what we do through our care service deliveries, which is always a good thing.
I can only agree, Meg. And I think with any challenge like the one that we are all facing at present in community services, the more hands, the better. And, it will keep us moving forward. And I'm sure this pressure will create the change we've all been talking about for a very long time in the sector. So, look, thank you all so much for joining, Janet, Nicole, Meg. It's always great to chat to the three of you and your insights. Thank you to everyone that joined us for the conversation today. We do really enjoy sharing these conversations with you all, and please reach out to us if you've got any questions or thoughts or ideas or anything you might need. And a lot of love for everyone out there in community services, and thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Thank you, ladies. It was wonderful.
Thank you both.
Thanks, Simon.
Bye now.
Bye now.